I think Hyacine is a pretty good investment if you have HP scaling and consuming units like Castorice and Tribbie, but the bigger questions I had, and perhaps you as well, is how much of an upgrade is Hyacine over Gallagher, and therefore how good is her pull value? Well, let's start by understanding what she even does. Hyacine is a very high speed character who should be an abundance unit usually, but since she comes with a cute little memo sprite, Little Ika, she is a remembrance unit. Just like RMC, both Hyacine's skill and ultimate will summon Little Ika. What Little Ika does is that when allies lose HP, Little Ika will consume its own HP to heal that ally very slightly. We're talking like 200 to 300 health. However, after Hyacine uses her ultimate, they enter the after rain state, and Little Ika will then heal all allies one more time after the first heal. So if, for example, your entire team loses HP, whether it be from Castorice's skill or an enemy attacking you, Little Ika heals your entire team twice during the ultimate because all allies lost HP and then one more instance of healing for all allies, so about a total of 2800 to 3000 plus health each time that this happens. This works perfectly with Castorice's skill because it consumes the entire team's HP, so one Castorice skill can give her about 40 to 50% charge instantly, which is obviously very useful. That's not all, the after rain state also gives all allies, including herself, a HP boost, which is exceedingly rare. I believe the only other character being Lynx. Naturally, this is really strong for characters like Castorice, Mydei, Tribbie, and Blade, and herself since she will heal more. Speaking of healing, Hyacine is very hard to estimate accurately how much she would heal on average because her healing is very dependent on your team losing HP to begin with. So she's not consistent, and she can heal a lot more depending on the enemy or team. In the simulation I used that was slightly more conservative in terms of the enemy attacking you, Hyacine actually provided more charges to Castorice than even Gallagher at S1, and she can really pop off if played against a more aggressive enemy like Flame Reaver or Pollux. But obviously she falters against enemies who are AFK, most of them the earlier enemies. The other very cool thing about the after rain state is that Little Ika quite literally becomes a missile and launches itself at all enemies and deals damage based on a percentage of healing done by both of them. Due to her talent, Little Ika can get up to a pretty ridiculous 240% damage boost whenever they provide healing. Because of how her first few actions should go, Little Ika's first attack will already have this 240% boost, and he can deal damage at roughly 60 to 100,000 for each enemy, which is quite funny because Ika attacks after Hyacine takes a turn, and due to her high speed, will be very frequent. With some luck and depending on the type and number of enemies, roughly 4 to 10,000 extra DPV, obviously very high for a healer. The reason why I say some luck is because of her energy cost, probably the biggest issue I have with the kit, because Hyacine has 140 energy and her ultimate lasts for 3 turns. Even with an ERR rope and Little Ika attacking, you can only guarantee about 130-ish energy after 3 turns, meaning Hyacine or Little Ika must be hit at least once or twice or defeat enemies in 3 turns in order to maintain 100% uptime. As a lot of damage is tied to this ultimate, including HP boost for the entire team, extra healing, even Little Ika's attacks, this can really hurt. Meaning you have to play smarter with her, perhaps by hitting war armor enemies so that she can regenerate more energy, and if there aren't any war armor enemies, you just gotta pray that she or Ika gets hit. Do also note that since she's so incredibly fast, it means the probability of getting hit within this 3-turn duration would be slightly lower than other characters that are slower. However, this works both ways. Since Hyacine is really fast, even if you use a 4-turn ultimate due to bad RNG, the downtime is pretty short, roughly 40 past action value, or if you get hit somewhere in between, probably even lower. Another limiting factor to Hyacine as a result of her energy cost is her skill point or SP usage. Hyacine wants to ideally use her skill 3 times in a row in order to have a better chance of using her ultimate. This doesn't necessarily make her bad outside of HP scaling teams because you can opt to go for a 4-turn ultimate, but she still consumes skill points at a much faster rate than other sustains than we are used to, which makes it slightly awkward in other teams. Anyways, from the kit alone, Hyacine is clearly meant to be the go-to healer for HP scaling and consuming units like Castorice and Tribbie because they barely consume skill points and can consume their own HP, which will lead to more healing from Little Ika. Now that we understand what she does, this then brings us to the other questions. How well does she fare against Gallagher, and how good is her pull value? Before we get into Hyacine's comparisons in Theorycrafting, I would like for you to know this video is sponsored by LD Shop. It's a safe and reliable way to top up jades at a discounted price from 13 to 25% off, and you can get extra discount coupons with my code in the description. All you need is your UID. You don't need to give your login details or anything like that. It's completely safe. You get your jades very quickly. I got my Express Pass pretty much instantaneously, and if you spend 80 USD, you can become a VIP with even more rewards like free Express Passes and more discounts. Now let's get into the juicy, meaty theory crafting part. I found that Hyacine would perform a decent chunk or significantly better, depending on your perspective, than Gallagher even at E0S0. This is the more standard tame comparisons, a 3-target scenario where it slightly favors Gallagher. Hyacine is about 9% better in her absolute worst scenario, where the team doesn't get hit pretty much at all, so she doesn't heal, 49% better at S0, and 63% better at S1. A pretty sizable upgrade already. Normally, I like to compare characters in their best case scenario, which would be Pollux in this case, but it's a bit of a weird exception. I'm not sure if I just happened to find the absolute best case Castorice scenario ever, but I was able to find a scenario where I would 0-cycle Pollux in 76 action value. If I don't account for the damage reduction that the boss has, Gallagher came out to be about 38,000 DPV, which I already thought was quite ridiculous at the time of Castorice release, but with Hyacine, I was able to get 100,000 DPAV. And I thought to myself, this is stupid, so I tried to find a more realistic number because Pollux has a lot of damage reduction at the start of the phase, and it still came out to be about 73,000 DPAV at 5 cost, which is honestly just... it's out of this world. If you're curious, this is what the rotation looks like. Basically, on phase 2, Castorice is able to get 2 ultimates back to back because of the constant healing from Little Ika, and she also allows for Castorice to get the ultimate quickly when using her skill. If I took away Castorice as 1, and she no longer gets the advance, it still doesn't really matter since Hyacine is about 3 action value after this last turn, which will still guarantee the last summon. I guess this is one example of when the enemy is much more aggressive, and I think it's pretty safe to say Hyacine is a significant upgrade for Castorice and Tribbie. She unfortunately doesn't perform as well for Mydei because her healing isn't as high for a single target, but rather more spread out across the team, but it still performs somewhat well. This is most likely because both Tribbie and Mydei are on the team, kind of like the Castorice scenario, and the HP boost is incredibly strong because it not only applies to Mydei, but also Tribbie herself, and they will both contribute even more damage. I imagine this will be even higher if you have Tribbie S1, which was not accounted for here. In the end, I used a pretty rough simulation just to estimate the difference, because both Mydei and Hyacine rely a lot on enemy RNG, so it's never going to be very accurate no matter what I do, and it came out to be a pretty small difference. Basically, what would happen is Mydei would gain less charges in general, but the team would do much more damage, which led to a faster clear speed. Hence, for Mydei specifically, it's slightly harder to justify the pulls for her, but honestly, it was probably better to run Mydei sustainers to begin with, right? If Mydei is able to get a lot of healing with charges from the enemy anyway, like against Pollux, Hyacine would then perform much better, but that's just one scenario. Blade should also actually benefit very well from Hyacine, especially with her S1 since there is a HP drain, but he is getting a buff very soon in one patch, so I think it's more appropriate we take a better look at him then. Though Hyacine is very strong in most HP scaling teams due to her pretty decent healing and very high damage for sustain, she can still be used somewhat effectively in other teams. I think the more obvious examples that come to mind right now would be the Herta and Acheron. But like I mentioned, it can be a bit awkward because the Herta teams can be extremely SP negative, not to mention Ningxia technically provides more AoE attacks even if it deals less damage. The same goes for Acheron teams. Aventurine S1 should technically still be the fastest, provided enemies have extremely frequent AoE attacks. Hyacine S1 is sort of a different approach and lends more consistency than Trend or Aventurine S1, and is still able to apply debuffs at a very fast rate for sustain. The issue with Acheron is the team structure, whatever you call it. As of 3.3, the best team should most likely be Cypher and Xiaoqiu, both of which want to use the skill early since Xiaoqiu gets his ultimate from this, and because Cypher gets an attack boost, making it quite awkward since you would ideally want to use 4 skill points at the start of the battle in such a team. And even if you used Pella over Cypher, you usually have to use a skill immediately to get a 1-turn ultimate just like Xiaoqiu does. Right now, it's a bit awkward to slot Hyacine into other teams comfortably, especially at the start of the battle, but if you give her a bit more resources, she can still work great in other teams. In my opinion, sustains are the worst type of units in Star Rail because most of them don't do much more than just healing and shielding, and in a game like Star Rail where clear speed is king, a sustain only provides more value when they can not only keep your team alive, but also contribute in some way to your team's damage or clear speed. Thankfully, Hyacine does exactly that, especially so for a HP scaling team like Castorice, who requires the sustain slot and provides a significant upgrade even over Gallagher, who is an extremely strong unit. She does also perform even better the faster enemies attack, but conversely is worse the less enemies attack. Hyacine is also not dependent on debuffs like Gallagher for healing, meaning it's completely fine if waves refresh like in Pure Fiction, which makes Hyacine the most flexible sustain slot on top of everything else that she already provides for Castorice teams. Outside of Castorice, Hyacine still provides pretty okay value to units like Mydei and great value to Blade, much more so if you also have Tribbie, but she is not as easily played in other teams as units like Ningxia, Venturine or Gallagher that can fit pretty easily in a lot of teams in the game. Hence for HP scaling teams and units, I think Hyacine is a solid 0.5 to 0 across the board, a very good pull. Outside of these teams, she still works pretty fine even if you have to play a Photon Ultimate or if the HP boost is less useful, but I think she should still lose some points for that, perhaps 0.5 to 1. That's pretty much it for my Hyacine analysis, and in-depth guide on her will be out very soon, so remember to subscribe and see you then.
タイタンは本当に人間の神に対する認識に合っていると言えるのだろうか。